Mr. Secretary, during your confirmation hearing, you failed to deny the conclusion that you would carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs. So let me be direct. Given what we are seeing across the country right now, would you carry out or issue an order by the president for our military to fire upon protesters actively engaging in their civil right to exercise free speech, their First Amendment rights? Would you give that order from the president?
I assume you're insinuating what's going on in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't.
Not just Los Angeles. If we take a look at protests throughout the country, it's a simple question. If directed by the president, would you order our military to fire upon protesters?
Imagine asking the Secretary of Defense a yes or no question about shooting protesters and watching him dodge it in real time, because that's exactly what just happened, and the implications are chilling.
You're now recognized as the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Tokuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree we've had many performances today, but what we'd like is some answers. Mr. Secretary, did you invite Elon Musk for a briefing on war plans with China to the Pentagon? Yes or no is simple.
There's been a lot of hyperbole and incorrect reporting around that situation, but we did invite Elon over to come talk to us generally, but there was no war plans being discussed.
Okay, so whose idea was it to invite him to the Pentagon for a briefing? You mentioned you served at the pleasure of the president. Was it the president's will to have him come and be briefed?
As you know, at that time, Elon Musk was leading up Doge efforts, and we've taken a great investment in Doge at DOD, and so getting his input on how we make DOD more efficient makes a great deal of sense.
Okay, but don't you think it's a conflict of interest for the world's richest man? Many of the contracts that the DOD is engaged in, billions of dollars of contracts going to his company, and he is, as to your point, was leading Doge, which was involved in cutting hundreds of contracts, but also becoming intimately aware of the platforms and the requirements that would be given out for new contracts. Did you not think it was a conflict of interest to invite someone with financial interests into the Pentagon to have firsthand knowledge of what they could then bid on for their own, enrichment?
Ma'am, it was just an informal discussion, but I'll tell you, anyone that knows our Defense Department knows we show no preference to any company other than what your capabilities are, and we're grateful for the places where his companies benefit our national defense.
So for a $280 million donation, the world's richest man with companies intimately linked and involved in billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense gain access into the Pentagon. So would you say that any company right now that has multi-billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense has access to the Pentagon right now? 1-hour briefings with you personally?
On the regular basis, I meet with many people and many different companies and many different aspects of our defense industrial base to ensure we have the best possible capabilities. It would be imprudent to do
I'm sure for an investment of $280 million, Elon's investors are quite happy that it's come out into the billions. I want to jump questions right now. Mr. Secretary, on January 6, 2021, rioters and looters attacked federal law enforcement officials, vandalized and destroyed federal government property, and caused an estimated $2.7 billion in damages right here at the Capitol. Would you have sent the National Guard and the Marines in on that day?
Well, unfortunately, President Trump requested the National Guard in advance, and that was...
It took him quite a long time. I'm asking you, as Secretary of Defense, would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day? We had 140 Capitol Police officers injured. One died the next day. Would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines?
As I said, President Trump directed National Guard to be there in advance.
And I think you can look at the record of how long it actually took for him to actually send them in. But it's good to hear that it sounds like you would have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day in which the insurrection was taking place right here at the Capitol. Mr. Secretary, during your confirmation hearing, you failed to deny the conclusion that you would carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs. So let me be direct. Given what we are seeing across the country right now, would you carry out or issue an order by the president for our military to fire upon protesters actively engaging in their civil right to exercise free speech, their First Amendment rights? Would you give that order from the president?
I assume you're insinuating what's going on in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't.
Not just Los Angeles. If we take a look at protests throughout the country, it's a simple question. If directed by the president, would you order our military to fire upon protesters? Simple yes or no.
Ma'am, we have, as you know, and as this committee knows, we have standard rules of engagement that are in place that give guidance to our troops, and they abide by them.
I'm asking what you would do. Again, you said you serve at the pleasure of the president. Is that not true?
I do serve at the pleasure.
So if the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you do so? Now, you failed to answer this question as well in your confirmation hearing when asked by members of the Senate.
Because I refuse to accept a false hypothetical that's attempting to put me in a corner and make it look like a representative.
At a time when we have more Marines and National Guard in Los Angeles than we do in Syria and Iran alone, I don't think this is a hypothetical. This is an actual situation that we are dealing with right now. So again, I will ask the question, the last 14 seconds I have, would you order our military to shoot at their fellow countrymen if ordered by the president?
I think it's interesting that for 4 years, insurrection was the left's
I think we
favorite
know your
word,
answer. Thank you, Mr.
and
Chair.
that
I
was
yield back.
invoked in L.A. They were
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady's time's expired.
What made this moment so unsettling wasn't the tone or even the tension. It was the silence where a line should have been drawn. Jill Tokuda wasn't asking Pete Hegseth to speculate about some far-off dystopian future. She was asking him to clarify the limits of his authority right now, in a country already grappling with protests, militarized responses, and a growing confusion about where civilian power ends and military power begins. That distinction matters because the United States was built on a very specific fear that armed force, if left unchecked, could be turned inward. That's why the founders separated military authority from political loyalty. That's why the Constitution places civilian control of the military under law, not personality. And that's why the Posse Comitatus Act exists, to prevent the military from being used as domestic law enforcement against the public. Tokuda's question went straight to the heart of that framework. Would you obey an order to fire on Americans exercising their First Amendment rights? That's not a trick question. It's a constitutional one. And the reason it matters that Hegseth wouldn't answer no is because in moments of real crisis, ambiguity is power. When officials refuse to define limits, they preserve room to maneuver later. History shows us this pattern over and over again. Leaders don't announce authoritarian shifts in advance. They normalize exceptions, blur definitions, and frame accountability as partisan hostility. You saw that play out in real time. When pressed about Elon Musk's access to the Pentagon, Hegseth leaned on language that sounds harmless on the surface. Informal discussion, efficiency, input. But those words carry weight when the person involved is the world's richest man, a major defense contractor, and a political donor with billions in government contracts at stake. Access is power. Information is power. Proximity to decision-makers is power. The issue isn't whether Musk is talented or whether his companies provide useful technology. The issue is whether private financial interests are being allowed inside the most sensitive national security institution in the world without clear guardrails. That's not a partisan concern. It's a structural one. Then came January 6th. Tokuda didn't ask Hegseth to relitigate the riot. She asked him to take responsibility for the role of force in protecting democracy. Would he have deployed the Guard and Marines to stop an attack on the Capitol? Once again, no direct answer. Instead, the conversation drifted toward timelines, process, and what other people did or didn't do. That deflection matters because leaders reveal their priorities not just by what they say, but by what they avoid saying. The inability to plainly affirm that force should be used to defend democratic institutions, but not to suppress dissent, tells you something about where the lines are being drawn. And that brings us back to the question that landed so hard, it still hasn't stopped echoing. If the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you do it? Hegseth framed it as a hypothetical meant to corner him, but it wasn't hypothetical at all. It was a test of constitutional literacy and moral clarity. The correct answer under U.S. law is not complicated. The military does not fire on peaceful protesters, period. An unlawful order is not an order that must be obeyed. Every service member is trained on this. They swear an oath not to a president, not to a party, but to the Constitution. So when the Secretary of Defense refuses to say no, what he's really doing is refusing to reassure the public that the military will not be politicized. That's why this exchange resonated far beyond the hearing room. Because Americans aren't just worried about policy anymore. They're worried about boundaries, about whether institutions that are supposed to protect democracy will hold when pressure comes from the top, about whether the military remains a shield or becomes a tool. Tokuda wasn't trying to score points. She was doing the job Oversight was designed to do, force clarity where power prefers fog. And Hegseth's response, evasive, defensive, time-burning, revealed a worldview where loyalty to command risks overshadowing loyalty to law. That's not a left-wing concern. That's an American one. Democracies don't collapse all at once. They erode when norms are bent, when questions are treated as attacks, and when leaders get angry at being asked where the line is instead of confidently stating it. The most important takeaway here isn't what Hegseth said, it's what he wouldn't say. Because if someone in charge of the world's most powerful military cannot clearly affirm that Americans will not be fired upon for protesting, then the public has every right to keep asking questions. And that's exactly why this moment matters. If you believe civilian oversight matters, if you believe the Constitution matters, no matter who's in office, and if you believe the military should never be turned against the public, then don't let this exchange disappear. Share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so more Americans understand what's actually at stake, not just in this hearing, but in the direction of power itself.